Hello, and welcome to our February edition of It's Taboo, Let's Talk. I'm your host, Sophia Abdul from Muslim Sisters of Staten Island. And for those who are not familiar with our program, I just want to share a little bit about It's Taboo, Let's Talk with you guys. Our first talk actually started in October of 2019. With an in-person conversation at Masjid Taqwa about gender-based violence. And we actually did it with our sister Zainab, who will be on the screen today talking about the subject matter. And then since we started that, it just started a conversation that we all needed to have. And so we started this program called It's Taboo, Let's Talk, because we talk about subject matters that most people don't really want to talk about, but it is a necessary thing for us to do. So since then, we did about 20 plus taboo talks to date. We talked about domestic violence, health disparities, social issues, Asian hate, Black hate, we talk about voting, we talk about different types of things that people don't really want to talk about. So today we have three extraordinary panelists with us. We do have Sister Zainab Abdul Rahim from Muslim Wholehearted Initiative. And we have Dr. Imam Abdul Salam Musa, and from many organizations, which I'm going to share with you guys as when I talk about his bio. And we have a young lady presenting with us today, Stephanie Leonardo, and she is a creative art therapist. So welcome to our program, It's Taboo, Let's Talk. Our first panelist today will be speaking would be Sister Zainab. So I'll tell you a little bit more about Sister Zainab. Like I said before, we did our first in-person workshop with Sister Zainab at Masjid Taqwa, and we talked about domestic violence. Sister Zainab is a mental health therapist, which started her organization, Muslim Wholehearted Initiative, in 2019. Which that organization is a not-for-profit organization that does community resource services and provides Islamic-focused mental health counseling and rehabilitation services. They do it both virtual and in person. And she also participates in community events, workshops, seminars, and all of those are centered around single purpose of living authentic lives through the Islamic lens. To date, MWI, which is Muslim Wholehearted Initiative, have created over 10 original workshops around healing and personal development and has provided counseling service for over 200 clients. As MWI expands, Sister Zainab and her team are currently working on purchasing office space to provide these vital services for our community. So welcome to our conversation today, Sister Zainab. Our other panelist is Dr. Imam Abdul Salam Musa. Brother Musa is a master's degree graduate for Theological Foundation. He is a visiting professor of American Muslim Studies, diplomat with the College of Pastoral Supervision and Psychotherapy. He's also board certified chaplain and board certified pastoral counselor. He is the president and co-founder of Southeast Queens Muslim Collective, Incorporated, president of the Indigenous Compassionate Care Incorporation, which they're going to be working with us next week on another project in Staten Island. So I hope that many of you who are listening will be able to come out and be a part of that conversation. That is an in-person conversation workshop. It's going to be at Wagner College. He's also the former director of United Muslim Movement Against Homelessness, and which was a former program of ICNA relief. He co-founded the first Muslim women's shelter in Queens. I think it initially was called Muslim Women's Help Network, but now it's known as ICNA Relief Transitioning Housing. Dr. Imam Musa has been a compassionate activist in the secular and Islamic communities for over 45 years, addressing the social ills affecting communities and working with the interfaith communities for 25 years. Among those are some among of his wonderful accomplishments. And for the last 11 years, he has been trained individuals from all faiths in clinical pastoral education. He's worked with closely with St. John's Episcopal Hospital in Far Rockaway and New York. I'm sorry. I apologize. My thing went in the way. And he considers to be one of the things that he considers to be his greatest achievements is that he co-founded Islamic Indigenous Compassionate Care Incorporation, an organization that ministers to those in need of pastoral care. Welcome again, Imam Musa. Then next one we have Stephanie Lariano, yes. So she's a after student graduate. She has been in practice in her field as a creative art therapist for about 2 years now, and she's bilingual. She's a bilingual creative art therapist who specializes in loss and bereavement. Her population that she serves, she counsels children, adolescents, and their caregivers. Stephanie specializes in, like I said, in loss and bereavement, and she works at the Jewish Board Family and Children's Services here in Staten Island. So welcome all to our Taboo Talk today.
Thank you for having us.
Anyway, first up, I think we're going to be talking about, 1 second. I apologize. So we're going to talk about one of the books that we have on the flyer, which is Sister Zainab. Would you want to share with us your conversation?
Okay, sure. Just so that I'm clear on exactly what I'm sharing. First of all, thank you so much for having me. I apologize. I had a little bit of a long evening. Wasn't partying or doing anything illegal. However, a long night. And then coming back home to mother was just a lot. But I guess we'll start then with talking about grief. Is that what you mean, Safi?
Yes. Yeah, we're talking about the Black grief.
Yes. Okay. So let's jump right in. I'll open up with some dua. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. We begin in the name of Allah and with the greetings of peace. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. To everyone that is viewing, thank you so much for tuning in. I will start with, I like to define terms. I think it gives us a leveled playing field, and then we can expound from there. So let's first and foremost talk about what is grief, right? So grief is the response to loss, simply put, particularly the loss of someone or that has passed, a loved one, someone that you had a bond of affection with. It's typically focused on an emotional response to loss, right? But it can also be, it can also have physical, cognitive, behavioral, social, cultural, spiritual, and philosophical dimensions as well, right? In preparing for this talk, I came across a beautiful article by the University of Arizona. And in that article, they mentioned that as it relates to our grief as African Americans, right? Because we may not necessarily all be Muslims here, but the thing that unites us is that we're all people of color, right? And our grief is embedded in our history, right? Our history of trauma here on these shores, and I always say, whether you were dropped off in the Americas or in the Caribbean, right? We had no say in where we were dropped off, right? But we all suffered a trauma. But I think it is important for us to understand the unique experience of Black loss, grief, and bereavement. We first have to consider the suffering that we've endured, right? And America's long history with racialization and racial violence against African Americans and against people of color, right? And how that informed our trauma, right? Um, and it's interesting. Our grief is really unique to us, right? So we grieve collectively. And what do I mean by that? And there's a historical component to that, because oftentimes during slavery, enslaved Africans, we were pulled away from our immediate families. We were split from our families, and we were placed in different places. So what we ended up having to do as a result of that is we would form like these fictive bonds, right, with the folks that were around us. And those people became our family. And it's something that's true for our communities even today. Like we refer to a dear friend as an auntie, right? Our children will call them auntie or uncle, or an elder in our community will be like our grandmother or our mom or our mother or our father. We form these bonds even today, and it derives really. It is a part of our culture. It's a part of who we are. But there's also a component of grief to that, and it's so interesting because of the separation that we endured during the days of slavery. It was just something that we kept in our culture. Just looking at grief, as we mentioned, as it being something that we do collectively. Um, I don't know if I'm frozen. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Can you? Okay, I see you. Okay, it's like it went in and out, so I paused. I was like, wait a minute, I'm gonna wait for it to come back. Okay, so as I mentioned now, right? As I mentioned previously, when enslaved Africans were torn from their families, we did form these fictive kinships, right, with one another. And what it did was it lent itself to us having that natural that support that we had lost with our biological families. Um, but with that also came a lot of trauma as well. And what I mean by that is that we were told that our pain did not matter. So we internalized that belief and we began to believe that our pain did not matter. For example, you may see a young Black child crying, right? And you'll see his mother, shut your mouth. Don't you say your emotions, like, and what we're communicating to our children is that there's no space for their emotions. There's no space for them to cry and to feel, right? I always say, and this is something that Dr. DeGrew mentions, and when she speaks about her book, Post Traumatic Slave Syndrome, is that when white children are in a store, in a supermarket, wherever, they're allowed to explore. We keep our kids close to the hip. Don't you touch nothing. Don't you do that. Don't you do. And there is a trauma there. There's a grief there. The first grief is that we're fearful that someone will take them. That goes back to slavery because it was a great possibility that our children would be taken from us. But the other piece that is a bit challenging for us to talk about is the fact that we believe that our emotions, we did not have to hold space for them. And that's where a lot of our unlearning has to be done. We didn't think our emotions needed to be addressed. Us being able to explore wasn't important. We were just in survival mode, many of us, right? And even to this day, like it shows up differently, but many of us are in survival mode. It's like, no, grief, crying, wipe those tears. But what we do on a conscious and on a unconscious level is that we teach our children that having emotions, grieving, feeling, right? Having a human reaction to something is something that is unique to someone else, not us. We don't have the right to do that. So I think that for us, is so many things that we can unpack as it relates to grief, but I definitely wanted to go over the historical context of our grief, right? Oftentimes, in the Black family, the woman is the head matriarch of our families, and she can be very stoic, right? So even though she's extreme, she's going through extreme loss. She may have lost her husband, her sons, her daughter, whatever it is that she may be experiencing. There is a stoic presentation. We do not see any emotionality in her presentation. And again, it teaches us that emotions, there's no place for emotions, right? Now, let's look at what personal loss is. And this is the conversation that you and I were having, Sophia. Um, so as it relates to personal loss or personal grief, right? This is where loss is more of an individual experience, right? Like losing a loved one. Whereas collective loss is more of an experience that happens communally, right? So, for example, as African Americans, we experienced both communal and individual loss when we witnessed the brutal death of George Floyd, right? I believe that everyone would agree, but we experienced a loss there, right? And this is something that continues to happen. Breonna Taylor, the names are endless. The brother who recently was killed by the police officers, I think it was Tyree Nichols. Forgive me if I'm saying his name incorrectly, but another loss, right? And this is collective, and this is communal and individual. And the reason why it's individual is because the reality is that this is a reality for us individually, right? This is something that is very real for us. This could possibly happen to us. But then communally, we're grieving the loss of someone and we feel helpless because there's not much we feel we can do. So I just wanted to give a little bit of context to our loss. And then also speaking lastly to how our loss impacts our health, right? So we know that as people of color, as Black Americans, African Americans, we already suffer from health disparities, right? We don't have access to solid, great health care. So there are a lot of disparities that we are starting off at a deficit, unfortunately, right? And this is something that is well documented. What's less understood is the emotional toll um, not having this access takes on us, right? So we go through this, but we don't have access to grief counseling. We don't have sufficient access to any sort of medical support or psychological support. We just don't get that access. So that takes a toll on us, right? It makes us more likely to suffer from stress-induced illnesses like ulcers, strokes, things like this impact our communities in a great way.
Thank you, Sister Zainab. I mean, as you're speaking, like tears are coming to my eyes because I'm like, oh my goodness, you know,
Yeah.
even just thinking about my own struggles and my own, experiences and how I deal with them. And when you started to talk about, the personal loss, whether it's, a death of someone or even a friendship, right?
Right.
Someone that you're so close to for so long and then they're no longer in your lives, that also has an emotional and social impact as well on someone. So, I'm really thinking about, your conversation. I truly appreciate you sharing this with the community.
Yes. No, thank you. I'm happy to be here. I look forward to hearing what my panelists have to say as well.
Okay, next up, I believe, next up, we're going to talk about actually the generational perspective and cultural perspective. Brother Musa, would you want to share a little, expound a little bit more? I know Sister Zainab touched culture, but I'm sure you have a heap of more information that you want to share, inshallah.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum.
You're
Good
muted.
afternoon,
Oh,
everyone.
okay, go ahead.
Thank you for allowing me to be here to share my own experience being the elder, inshallah. The grieving process can be really complicated for the African American, especially for the African American Muslim, because many of us have evolved or revert or convert, however you may want to say it. And sometimes we come in conflict with grief and the alleged system of Islam that some of us are not clear on and some of us are. But what happens is for grieving, it as a Muslim,
Oops, we lost him. Sorry, we're having a little technical difficulty.
well, I'm buffering here.
We're good. You're good
Okay,
now.
we're good. Okay, I'm
Yeah.
here. Okay, the grieving process for us can be quite complicated, especially if we're Muslims and our family is not. How do you navigate those situations where you go to funerals of your relatives and it's contrary to our belief system? How do you express the grief and be sensitive to those who you are around? With grief, there's a process, and especially as we age, we grieve differently, and many of us may not understand that the grieving process can hit us at any time. It doesn't necessarily have to be hypothetically, no, factually. I lost my mother 7 years ago. And I can talk about my mother and have the same conversation about my mother tomorrow, the exact same conversation, and I'll break down crying. So sometimes we go into despair. We feel guilt with grief because we didn't get a chance to say what we wanted to say, or we didn't do what we wanted to do. And then we talk about, as Sister Zainab spoke about, the matriarch of the family being stoic. My mother was a stoic woman, a educated.
Lost him again. We'll get him. Yes, we could actually fill in the blanks while we wait for Brother Musa to get back on. In terms of one thing that he did mention, about that grief can hit you. Go ahead, Brother Musa. You're back on.
Yes. As African Americans, grief, he says, I don't know if it's different, but I believe it's different because of our own experience. Our experience of generational trauma, and as the sister spoke about, being even in denial, not able to express your emotions. And then from an Islamic perspective, in some schools of thought, sisters are not even supposed to go to the funeral. They're not supposed to go to the graveyard, rather. And say, they can come to the janazah, but they can't go to the burial ground. So how does that make a sister feel in the process of her losing a loved one and not being able to attend the burial service? That doesn't normally necessarily happen with the African American community, but it does happen. There's 3 stages also that is indicated in the African American grief process. That's recognition of the death and that you are grieving. I remember when my son's mother died, he was in total denial for about a week that she wasn't dead. And she had died in another state. I sent him there. And remembering in the grief process can be self-healing, and it can be antagonizing. And what do we need to do? We need to rebuild, reflecting on the good things, the positive things and the loved one that you lost. The sister spoke about the communal grief, not just George Floyd, but here in New York City. I'm right now. I'm up in the Bronx, and they just had a African brother, youngster, that got killed.
Boy, this subject matter is pretty deep. I know. Um, it just, these conversations is bringing back so, I'm sure, many memories for all of us here on the panel and those who are listening, that these types of loss cut pretty deep.
Assalamu alaikum.
We're back.
Okay, I'm back. Oh,
Yeah, that's it.
Y'all left too, huh?
No,
No.
you're back.
Okay.
We were just filling in the gaps until you got back.
Okay, alhamdulillah. And so what is our relationship to this young brother that just got killed? It's a collective grief because he's an African American, because he was born here, but he's of African descent. So we just reflect on the violence that is happening within our community and how it is affecting us, and what do we need to do from a spiritual and a psychological perspective in helping to alleviate the grief that we are experiencing. I heard the sister also spoke.
Brother Moose is having a lot of difficulties today. That's just how it works, right?
Yeah, that's the nature of the internet. It's never,
yes,
never
very
there.
temperamental.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
never there when you need them.
But these subject matters, like I said, until Brother Musa pops back up again, it does raise a lot of emotions. And as I was trying to work on this project and this whole subject matter, creating content and reaching out, I also had to do some research, into my own, and I had to do some introspection as well. So, Brother Musa, you're back again.
Yeah,
I'm
in and out here. In the grief process, there's also this blame, there's despair, there's self-blame, it's endurance, and there's survival. And how do we cope? And I think that we're not, as a people, we don't reach out enough to each other when we are grieving. I think I know for a fact, having worked in hospitals and having taught clinical pastoral education for people who work in hospitals and other institutions, when you come, a loved one is getting ready to expire, how do you, as a friend of that person, assist them in their grief? Do you have the tools to know what to say, what not to say, when to be silent and don't say anything? Because just your presence is a healing mechanism for that person.
What I'm going to try to do is see if, just for sake of time, Stephanie, until Brother Musa gets a little stabilized, I think I'm going to let you go ahead and speak. And when Brother Musa comes in, I'll just tell him to hold that thought, and let you talk about, because he did start talking about, family members, right? And actually kind of segues into what you do as on your daily, your daily work. Okay, so go ahead and let us know all about what you do.
Sure, sure. So, just in hearing everyone speak, many thoughts came to my mind. First and foremost, when we talk about the family structure, um, uh, in marginalized communities, especially communities of color, we do turn to our family, in the sense that is our community and how we dealt with. Um, Historically, that's how we identified with or how we dealt with any issue regarding to health. We would turn to ourselves, our family members, because that highlights the inequality or inequities in the health system and how it doesn't serve our communities, or it underserves and it doesn't really reflect our experiences accurately. I just have a few statistics when it comes to um, the topic of experience in return in terms of loss that I deal with. I work with young children and adolescents, and often with families in general when they have a loss. Um, I co-facilitate and lead grief groups and do art therapy activities with children to expand their knowledge and give them a language to express their loss, because just as we were touching upon, in the realm of human experiences, we do all experience grief and loss, but we do believe that it's isolating and it only happens to just us. So just when it was reflected back to all of us through Dr. Musa, how we don't turn towards each other and we tend to isolate, I feel like that's an interesting concept to hold on to. Because often when I do encounter these children and we do explore the language of loss, they're like, wow, I do feel like this. And this is how I do feel, how I feel in general when we speak about the realm of experiences you can have when you have grief and loss. But one statistic that I have here is that 1 in 13 kids will experience the death of a parent or sibling by the age of 18. And when it comes to specifically those children of color, they typically experience these losses more frequently than other communities. And 56% of those deaths are usually due to health reasons such as diabetes or chronic liver disease, which highlights the opioid crises that unfortunately inflict many communities, including communities of color. And 16% or 16.7% of Black children make up the grieving population. It's a higher percentage, which is unfortunate. And in my personal experience, when I do assessments with children and we do have to ask them difficult questions related to their loss, I've encountered many children report back to me, or young children of color report back to me, that they have lost a caregiver or a sibling due to a stroke or heart attack. It's unfortunate, but I hear it more often than I'd like to, which again is referencing to what we're talking about, like why or what are the reasons that we do grieve our lost loved ones, what has caused their death. Unfortunately, I've encountered a lot of it having to do with community violence or even just the inequalities or inequities highlighted due to how our community does not receive a lot of help when in regards to our health care and our health in general. Yes, 28% of Black adults, the leading causes of death in Black adults are, or those who are African American and people of color, are 20% of it is homicide and 19% is diabetes. So,
Wow,
yeah.
that's
And
big. That's big.
yes, yes. Yeah, unfortunately, when I do talk to children, and the way they express loss, and when you ask them questions like how did your person die, a lot of them can openly and freely speak honestly and say, oh, my dad died of a stroke or a heart attack. And we don't expect children to have like this knowledge or to be well equipped with knowing what death is. So a lot of it is we have to teach them. But I can imagine as a parent, sometimes we want to protect our children and we don't understand how grief can manifest in children. So I often sit in on trainings or join trainings in my program to discuss with parents in the community or in the schools that we service to help better equip them with tools to speak with their children in regards to grief and loss. And what we tell them is you have to be honest, you have to be sincere, and you have to let them know that if there's a question that you don't have the answer to, that you have to be honest with that, and you have to let them know that they can express their feelings however they want to. Um, because the way that children grieve is different from us too. It does affect them. And often as adults, when we grieve, we do isolate, and maybe we want to show our grief in the way where we want to cry all day, or we're completely just disheveled. But in children, we talk about something called the dual process method, where you can take grief and loss in bite-sized doses, where children do often play because that's how they rationalize and process their day-to-day activities. That's how they problem solve. So grief in children may look like they're going to play, they're going to laugh, they're going to be amongst their friends, but maybe sometimes they'll talk to you and say things like, sometimes I think about mom or dad and where'd they go. And adults, we don't like to think that kids feel like that or have such a depth of emotion, but they see and absorb everything. And I don't think we consider that children want to protect us and don't want to like arouse emotionality in us as well. So if we do see our children cry by themselves, or they don't tell us everything all at once, or they keep things to themselves, it's often I've encountered because children don't want to upset their parents or caregivers. Which
Thank you.
just, yeah.
So question is, how does your work in art therapy help these grieving children deal with their loss, and how does that help for them to express themselves?
Oh my gosh, I think so. There's a few goals and objectives that we like to give to our children. Coping skills, and when we say coping skills, it's we want to help them think concretely about things that uplift them, things that they can turn to, or tools they can use when they experience or they recognize in themselves that they are emotional. With art therapy, we like to think of not the product, like we don't want to emphasize or glorify what they're making at the end. We don't want to say, oh, that was a beautiful drawing. That's not important. It's the process. It's what we call sublimation. It's a meditative process where they can work through their problem on either using their hands to mold something with clay, or to draw something, or to write something that may be a seed in their head for later. We like to do things to help self-regulate, or we call it affect regulation, where they get to learn how to soothe themselves, or they know how to strengthen the connection between their body and their emotions. I could go on, but because I'm really passionate about it, but often we are giving them the tools to recognize that when they have big feelings, it's okay. They can have big feelings, but that they also know that they can turn to something to uplift themselves in that moment.
Thank you so much. And I know Sister Zainab has done wonderful work in the community with mental health therapy. But before we lose Brother Musa again, we're going to try to have him finish up, and then I'll have a few questions that I actually have to ask you guys.
Assalamu
And welcome back.
I hope I can stay. The grieving process is so many different stages that we go through that many of us don't have the coping mechanisms. I believe I heard part of Sister Stephanie's presentation, but again, I was in and out, and I heard her speaking about children. But I'm wondering, Was anything spoken about adults in their
No.
process? Because as we go through different age groups, we grieve differently. As a child, you grieve one way. As an adolescent, you grieve one way. As a young adult, you grieve one way. As an older adult, you grieve another way. And especially as a Muslim, um, even though I said that I can cry about my mother on one subject, and another time I won't express any outward form of grief. However, my understanding is now that from a Muslim perspective, we know from Allah we come, and to Allah we shall return. You know, we just lost in our community, which was a communal group. We lost very two important people in our community, and
Yes,
that was Imam Umar Jalil, and my beloved, really close sister, Dr. Aliyah
Morgan.
Morgan. Um, and I don't even know how the grief is for me around her, because while she was sick, and she said to me, is, that I was grieving tremendously, and but then after she passed, I haven't, I'm an emotional sensitive person, and I haven't shed a tear. And I guess that's part of the grief process for me. But grieving is different from each and every one of us. But we always need to have someone we can reach out to talk with when those times come that you need to have some human interaction with someone to help you through that process. And then sometimes we don't need to have anyone around us. We just want to be by ourselves. But in any event, uh, I want to thank you for allowing me to share in and out part of coping with grief, and what we need to do. And I think we need to have more of these conversations. And we next week at Wagner College, we will be we'll be touching on the grief process and trauma. Um, so I hope that everyone that's on this call, that's viewing this, will come out to Staten Island to hear a more in-depth presentation, and we'll be live, so you won't have me back and forth. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
Like, one of the things that resonates with me is that people, we have this notion that we should have a certain way that we grieve, right? And so if you, like, for me, someone might say, oh, Sophia, you don't show any emotion, why aren't you crying? What, and I'm like, because maybe I'm processing it differently. So we can't look at each other and say, oh, you should be doing this to grieve. Because, like, we all know and we all see that everyone has a different way of how they process grief. And, you might not even feel the loss right now. Whereas your friend or your family member may feel it as intensely as in that moment. And then maybe, like brother said, years ago, years later, months later, weeks later, something happens that triggers that response, right? And it hits you so hard, like somebody punches you in the gut, and you're like, oh, wow. But for me, I think one of the things I use to help with coping with different types of loss is remembering the good times, because for me it keeps that alive to me. So it's not, they're not physically here, but I don't feel the loss as much as some people may, and then the good thing is too, I think brother Musa had mentioned about sometimes people feel like, like unfinished business, right? Oh, I should have said this, or this shouldn't have happened, or whatever. I think for me, and he was just talking about, Sister Aliyah, which was very dear to me. I mean, she was dear to a lot of us, actually. um, you know, I felt with her loss that I felt that I saw her like a week, a little bit over a week prior to her leaving. And so for me, I was content with the fact that I did get a chance to, see her and spend some time with her. And so that helped me with my grieving loss process, and being okay with the fact that, I had that experience. So, with everyone, we do have a different sense of how we deal with loss and grief. But I think it's important, like we all are saying, that for us to have a resource, right? Someone to lean on, someone to talk through our feelings, and not feel so alone. Because Sister Zainab will probably expound a little bit more on about what kind of emotional and mental health issues that can come about with not dealing with these process. So, Sister Zainab, would you be able to share a little bit about that, regarding how mental health can, spur through those times of inability or to process grief and loss?
Well, yeah. I mean, first of all, I enjoyed both presentations. I was just, as I was listening to Sister Stephanie, I just was thinking about my own daughter and her grief process, because I recently lost my mother, and just how, just definitely taking away some of the gems that you shared with us about making sure that, just creating that space for her, and just kind of taking my own advice, right? Um, but as it relates, yeah, because I think when we're in this practice, we can become a bit removed
Mm-hmm.
from it, right? And not necessarily apply it in our own lives. So it was just a great reminder for me to hear what she said, and the same with Brother Musa. Um, so I guess regarding mental health, well, first of all, not addressing grief can cause so many different things. First and foremost, depression, very real depression as well. Um, and I always say that if you are going through grief, it's always a good idea. Therapy is not the end all be all. There are many different modalities to healing and wellness. It's not the only one, but I would say it's always a great idea to check in with a mental health professional just to see where you are, maybe get some coping techniques. How do I navigate grief? How do I support my family in navigating grief? What does grief look like? Am I grieving correctly? And I'm using air quotes because, as Brother Musa and I believe Sister Stephanie mentioned, there's no right or wrong way to grieve, right? But just checking in to see if maybe I am not grieving. I'm not giving myself the necessary space to grieve. So that's the first thing that I would say. Just check in with a therapist or a mental health professional. As Brother Musa mentioned as well, definitely having people around you that you can talk to when you are feeling overwhelmed by your emotions. Because just like children, adults have big emotions as well. And we do need safe spaces to process those emotions. We do need people to sit and witness of us sometimes and just hear what it is that we're experiencing and going through. They don't necessarily need to chime in, not always. Sometimes, yeah, but we do need spaces where we can express that. Um, Also, giving ourselves permission to not be okay, right? And as it relates to us as a people, as African Americans, I think we are so hard on ourselves when it comes to our emotions. Like, it's like I'm feeling these things, but I will beat myself up because I'm feeling them, right? So giving yourself permission to be okay with not being okay, right?
Mm-hmm.
Be fair with yourself. You just experienced a loss, right? And the same advice that you would give to a loving friend, to a dear friend, give that to yourself. Be that for yourself. And remind yourself it is okay to not be okay. It is okay to struggle with this loss, right? That would be some of my advices. And I mean, and we can go on. We can go down the gamut, and I'm sure we will.
Yeah,
Go
oh,
ahead, Stephanie.
oh yeah, I was going to say, yeah, I think it's just giving ourselves permission to be kind to ourselves, not making self-care a goal, not putting pressure around closure, because, I feel like what people think of immediately when they think of grief and loss is the 5 stages, which I would love to debunk because there is no such thing. Grief is not a disease, it's not something we can cure or get over. It is something that we experience, we carry through the rest of our life. And just like Dr. Musa was saying, it's something that morphs and changes as we get older. It can be re-triggered. We can experience anniversaries or dates on the calendar that make those days harder to process those feelings. I think what leaves this, what makes it easier to process grief and loss is to know that grief is just yearning and love through space and time. We don't have that person physically, but it doesn't mean we've lost that memory or the things we love about them, and that doesn't wash away.
Wow, beautifully said. I when you said those words, it just hit me, honestly.
Oh.
Say that again. Grieving is what?
Yes, grieving is yearning and love through space and time. That's what it is. We don't stop loving our person just because they're not there physically.
That is true. That is so true. And it's those little triggers, right? Whether good or bad. It might be like something, or like when I lost my brother a couple years ago, and it was here one day, and my mother found them couple of days later. And I still struggle to figure out how my mom even, as a child, right? Because I'm an adult, but thinking about your parents and how they are processing that loss. And I, sometimes, you'll say to yourself, man, this person's really strong because they are dealing with it in such a, like we said the word stoic earlier, right? In a stoic way. But we don't know when the doors are closed, what goes on with them emotionally. Go ahead, sis.
I just wanted to chime in here, especially about that last part that you just mentioned. I think it's so important for us, especially those of us who are parents, to appropriately expose our children to our grief, right? Because we are a demonstration of grief. Like, it is okay. Like, mommy's sad today because I lost my mother. It's okay to be sad, right? This is what it looks like. Sometimes I'm going to be in bed for a little while, right? I'm not going to be happy, but reassure them that it's not about them, right? Because children, they are the center of their universe, right?
Yes.
So everything revolves around them. So just being reassuring and letting them know this is not about you. This is just really about what I'm going through. And you may experience this grief around losing, grandma or grandpa or whomever, right? But being that demonstration, because we really do have to be, as parents, a demonstration of healthy emotionality for our children. We have to. So I think it just really, as you were saying that, it was just like, oh my God, like we have to demonstrate that and teach our children that it is okay to go through these experiences, and teach them healthy ways to go through these experiences as well. And when we don't have those healthy ways, right? Because we're still human, we're imperfect, we're not going to grieve perfectly. Come back and have a conversation about that, right? Like when two parents argue in front of their child, make sure that child is also witnessing the makeup too,
Yes.
right? Because you're teaching them conflict resolution. Conflict comes up. How do you resolve it? Teach them that part too. It's a complete picture that you're giving your children, that we're giving our children, and it's so important. So I just wanted to mention that. Sorry for raising my hand.
No, no, absolutely not. Listen, this is a conversation, so it is totally fine.
Yeah.
The most important thing, like you said, is having that balance, right?
Yeah.
And but you also raised a very important thing, is that you said, we have to teach each other, but if we don't know how to deal with certain things, I think that's why a lot of the anger, frustration, inability to positively self-express comes out in our communities, because we have not been taught how to process trauma, how to process pain, how to process being okay with loss, because it is a part of reality, right? So for us, there are many people in certain professional realms that can deal with certain things because they know it, but when it's happening to you, totally different ballgame. Totally. I mean, you for all the knowledge that you have, and you disseminate to people that you work with. When it comes to your inner, you haven't even processed that whole thing, and you're like, I'm falling apart. I don't even know why. So I I got you, sis. I definitely got you. I don't know if anyone else. I'm sure everybody was nodding their head and understanding that it is grief and loss is such a individualized in many ways an individualized emotion. And so I think what we a good takeaway from this is that we can support each other through those times, right? Those times of need, instead of, oh, this person don't know how to grieve. Why is she not doing this? Why she's not doing that? Just if that's how they want to grieve, let them grieve it that way. But help them through that process instead of, making them feel like it's a bad thing. Unless it's, of course, they're doing something really bad, then that's a totally different animal. But just how they're processed, just be kind of be there for them, and don't make it about you, so to speak.
Yes, I think it was mentioned before, but yeah, often the human condition sometimes just wants to be witnessed. That's bar none. We don't want someone to fix us. We just want someone to listen.
Unfortunately, sometimes on the flip side is like, as parents, we always want to fix things as parents, right? Because if your child comes to you and feeling, crying about something, what do we normally do it instinctually? We try to hush them. Oh, yeah, everything's gonna be okay. But we're kind of in a way not allowing them to express, right? Because we're kind of holding down their emotions. In as we're having these conversations, and I think about my journey with my kids, and now I have a million grandkids, it seems like. I have to be now more conscious of how I deal with certain things with them and within myself as I grow. As we mentioned earlier, each different stages in our lives, we're going to process grief and loss differently. And so I'm learning to be more conscious of that too. Like if I'm dealing with a teenager, or that in that teenage population, how do they process things in general, instead of thinking about it how I, as an adult with lived experiences, process things. And I think having that consciousness makes a big difference in how we interact with each other. Because, Sister Zainab's journey in life would differ from your journey, would be different from Brother Musa's journey. If you know people and you know their journey, it's also good because, in essence, you can adjust the way in which you interact with them around those situations of grief and loss, instead of just saying, "Oh, you got to do it this way because this is how I do it," because you're not me. So that's one of the takeaways I'm definitely getting from this.
Yeah,
I'm grieving right now. I'm only getting bits and pieces of this important conversation, and, and would love to be a part of it. But I'm saying I don't want to repeat what's being said. You can be grieving and laugh too. And I'm just wondering, has the discussion come around in sharing grief with our children and letting them know about this? I don't know if this, because I'm hearing you for a few moments and then I'm not hearing you. So I'm grieving. I'm sad. So please forgive me for this Wi-Fi buffering in the manner that it is. But I think it would be best for me to try to listen as best as possible and hear what I can hear, because as if I get into something, the next thing I know, I'm gone again.
Well, Sister Zainab, I think if you want to reiterate a little bit about what you mentioned, so Brother Musa will, you will help with his grieving, his loss.
Well, like I said, the internet does us dirty often, right? Something we can guarantee. The internet will not be faithful to us at all, unfortunately. But no, going back to what we mentioned about children and grieving, is also allowing them to witness your grieving process as well, because you are a demonstration of how to appropriately grieve. Even if you don't get it right every time. Having those conversations with them, reassuring them that it is not about them, right? This grief has nothing to do with you. You are loved. You are wanted. I This is not about me not wanting you or not loving you. You have not done anything wrong, right? Because our children, I was listening to someone and they were like, our children are the most observant, unreliable witnesses ever. Right? Because they observe everything that we do, but their interpretation of what it means is sometimes often it's just because of where they are developmentally, right? But making sure that our children are witnessing us, and we're coming back to them and having these conversations and teaching them that it's okay. And as Sister Stephanie mentioned, also as parents, being able to identify what their grieving process looks like, because it does not look the same as it does for us, right? Children don't grieve the same way. Sometimes they may, fall out and cry and be devastated, but other times it may show up in a change in their behavior, right? A change in their appetite, a change in how they play, an increase in how they play. They may need more sensory stimuli, right? It varies in so many different ways. So that was really what we were touching on, Brother Musa.
Okay, unfortunate.
You missed that part. Okay, listen.
Listen,
It's on video, brother.
please, let's move on, because the last I heard about
The
showing
good thing
your
is,
children grief, and the next thing I know, you were gone.
that's okay. You're on video. You'll hear. I'll send you the
Sister
clip.
Zainab, thank you for sharing. I really appreciate what I did here. Okay.
I'm really glad. No problem.
Oh my goodness. I don't know. Talking about grief is it's very cathartic, actually. Being able to share this, because I think that's one of the things that our community is lacking, is ability to share. Because a lot of times we think about, we share a lot of triumphs, right? But we don't really share much about loss. Yes, we'll go, we'll do the funeral thing, and after that, but after that, it's just like nobody talks about it. And it's not to not to say that we're not grieving. It's just how do we make it okay, right? Because we all know, as we said at the beginning of the conversation, that it's a part of life. Loss is a part of life. Grief is a part of life. So how do we arm ourselves, and how do we educate our community and ourselves about how do we process the loss? Because there's different types of loss, like we talked about before. And so you can lose a job and feel some kind of way, right? As you see, people respond to loss of jobs very interestingly. But then, you'll look at this like, oh, this person is blah, 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 blah. But are we looking at, like, what are some of the mental health issues that will stem from that loss? Because that loss may have had a trickle effect, how it impacted their family, and then they lose their family. So one loss has a ripple effect, right? And so it creates this big snowball of emotions and everything else, and it gets really, really crazy. Okay. The chat, there's a few questions in the chat. Okay, hold on a moment. I believe there's a few questions. Naja? What is, my computer is having its own little time. Give me 1 second now. Let me check and see what's the questions we have in the chat. My apologies.
No worries. I wanted to say as to what you were saying, like there's a term that I've learned continuing to work in grief and loss, is what we call like secondary loss, is the losses that we have after the loss. But one loss can affect several things. And so stemming from losing your, let's say, your caregiver, what can happen is you can have a loss of security, a loss of just a financial loss. That person could have been the breadwinner, and also lead to a loss of, or displacement of, where you live. And also there's another term I've come across called ambiguous loss, where you may not have lost someone because they've passed away, but you may not see them physically, or that could be like a psychological loss where you don't see them, but you still long for the relationship of that person you don't have. So I
Hmm.
find it interesting that it's like, yeah, when we think of grief and loss, we think of someone had died, but sometimes there's different kinds of losses.
Definitely, definitely.
Mhm.
Man, I'm getting goosebumps.
Mhm.
Wow. Now you bringing out emotions that's buried.
Which is good, right? That's we're
Wow.
supposed to put them on the table. Put them
I
on
know my
the
kids be like, "Oh, mommy, you don't show your emotions." I'm like, "Little do you know." But one thing Sister Zainab did say, that I find definitely very helpful, and thank you, Sister Zainab, is to let your children see you grieve, and and for most culturally, right? If you think about it, culturally, that's not something we do, right? We don't want our kids to see us in this weak moment, in this weak space, because we're looking at grief as a weakness,
Right.
right? So we want to spare our children and people that are close to us from experiencing what we're experiencing. And so we kind of grieve in silos, and I'm learning how not good that is. Although, because we are trying to protect our families, but we're not really protecting our own emotions, in terms of being able to um, authentically express ourselves. It's like, oh, are you okay? Yeah, I'm good. While you're dying inside, and I think that's culturally is something that very poor practice for us to do, because it doesn't help. And it does, Sister Zainab mentioned earlier that it can manifest into different types of ways, like health disparities, right? We internalize our feelings so much that we make ourselves sick, in essence. And so that's something that I'll definitely be more mindful of, how I process different types of emotions as well. So thank you so much again, ladies, for your input. I really appreciate that.
Mhm. Yeah, and I even think, just going back to our tradition, the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he taught through example, right? Like this is the way that he taught Islam. This is the way that he taught the Quran. He lived it, and I think that oftentimes, um, what we do when we start to become emotionally well, or we start to heal from any sort of emotional trauma, is that we give other people permission to do the same, right? If I'm asked, I remember I was talking to someone and I simply asked the question, "Are you okay?" Literally, that was the only thing I said, and the person broke down in tears. And they said to me that they had never been asked that before. And this was an older person, my heart is breaking for them, because in all of your years on this earth, you had never been asked, and I mean in a meaningful way, of course, "Are you okay?" Like that to me was just, I it brings me to tears just thinking about that. Like we keep so much in as a community. Um, we don't we don't check in with ourselves, and as a result of that, we don't know how to check in with others. So it's just it really is. We have to begin to be that demonstration of emotional wellness and staying curious enough about who we are to take that journey, right? Like being curious about where we are emotionally, where we are in our mental wellness. You know,
How do you check in with yourself, Sister Zainab?
how do I check in with myself? I cry. No, it's fine. On cue. Um,
No, any
I
tips that you could use, we
sure,
all could
sure,
use to
absolutely.
check, do some
I'll
self
use
check, some self
I'll use
check.
myself. I'll use myself as an example. It's fine. Because on top of being a therapist, I also have lived experience as well. I struggled with very serious depression as an adult, and I think that one of the things that I have not perfected but become more proficient in is recognizing my triggers. What are my
Mm.
triggers? Where they come from? Stephanie, you have to unmute. Please jump. I want you to
Yes.
jump.
No, absolutely. As you said, like the way you reflect is like you're crying. Me too. I'm a huge, just like sensitive person,
Yes.
and I feel the same way. Like language is so important, and it's what we that's how we express ourselves, right? And just like emphasizing like the things that we say can strike a chord with someone. So we do have to be mindful about how things are expressing in ourselves, because as in the realm of mental health, we like counseling, we can say things like projection, but like that means just like if you don't check in with yourself, you can end up inflicting what you're feeling on someone else indirectly.
Right.
And like some of the things that I've come across, like the language around grief, it can be so helpful. It's just letting someone speak about the person they loved, or the person who passed away, their fondest memories. Like, who was that person? Can you tell me about them? Rather than saying things like, I know what you're going through, which can be minimizing,
Right.
or something like, at least this didn't happen, which is also invalidating. Like we don't want to squish down. It's not not the grief Olympics. No grief is greater or lesser than
Right.
someone else. And it's true, just what you said, Sister Zena, like the truth is like, if we're mindful about how we feel and when we express it to someone else, it's so touching. We do want to say like, how are you feeling truly? Just that simple statement itself can be so validating. I feel like something I've recently learned too is just when someone asks us, how are you feeling? We have this way of sometimes responding with, I'm good or fine. But if you notice, those words are not feelings. You're not saying, I'm happy, I'm sad, I'm angry. And I think to some degree, we've learned to just kind of maybe dissociate a little, just be like, I do need to be stoic right now in the realm of casual conversation.
The reality of it is that most of us don't know how to express feelings.
Yes.
We express thoughts when you ask how one feels. Like if someone says I'm okay, but what does okay mean? And we have to explore that. In my journey, I found out that women are more able to express how they feel and share their feelings than men. And I think that maybe that's why we have some of the violence that we have that men perpetrate or youngsters perpetrate on each other, because we don't know how to express our feelings. We don't know how to say that we're angry, we're sad. We don't know how to do that. And I think that there needs to be more conversations where men can become vulnerable and not feel stigmatized that they're weak or anything, because we all go through emotions and feelings. And I heard bits and pieces about loss. Grieving is not just necessarily about death, and which is so true.
And we done
Oh,
lost him.
oh, listening on every word.
I hope he's able to come back. I want to piggyback on something that he said, because it's actually a question here in the chat. I'm not sure if you guys are able to see the questions that are coming in on YouTube.
Oh, I didn't see. All right, I'll go on YouTube.
Yep, there you go. Okay. There was a few before that one, Safi. If you want to just scroll up a little bit. There are a few above that one.
Oh, okay. Let me find it. That's probably where Nadia was saying. I'll tell her to look on YouTube.
But it was in relation to how men express themselves or express their emotionality. I can't see it now. Holistic. Okay, there we go. What advice would you give men? And I think that Brother Musa was actually touching on that very thing, the importance of, brothers kind of, it's not that they don't have it. I think that often men don't, it's not that men don't have it. I think oftentimes they haven't tapped into it. There aren't spaces for them to tap into it.
And you got back, Brother Musa.
Yeah. All right.
I want to answer that lovely question there.
Yeah. That's for you, Brother Musa.
Got it? You want us to read it for you? Can you see it? Brother Musa?
Oh, are we frozen to him?
I don't know if you can hear us. Can you hear us?
I hear you. I don't know if you hear me.
Oh, we lost you again.
Yeah.
Oh no. I certainly, when I look at this, I certainly think of, there's this one really great documentary. I've never stopped thinking about it. It's The Mask We Wear. And it talks about how different ways children are nurtured and how that affects them and the way they process their emotions as they grow up. And I remember something that's always stuck. Girls have been always conditioned. When we encounter that they've had a challenge in their life, we talk to them and we use words like, "How do you feel?" And with young boys, we use the operative phrase of, "What are you going to do about it?" And often
Mm.
they have been wired to do action-based things to orient themselves to face these challenges. Rather, with girls, they brood because they've been given the language of, how do you feel and what are you feeling right now and what are you thinking? And so they think and they rationalize what they're going to do based on how they've thought it through, whereas boys are taught, what are you going to do to resolve it? Which
Is that why men are so they express their feelings with their hands?
maybe.
Because it's an action, right? And whereas but then they say, oh, women's so emotional, so maybe it stems from those types of a learned behavior, a learned ability to cope. um, but I definitely think that we could come back to so I know, Sister Zainab, I know you were working about the masking of emotions. We could try another one. As the head of the family, helping the family recover and not forgetting your own grieving process.
Continuation of the brother's question.
Oh,
Um,
that's a good, okay. Go ahead.
I
Sorry.
think that was the continuation of his question. So he says, what advice would you give men as
Mhm.
the head of the family, helping the family recover and not forgetting their own grieving process? Um, I think exactly what we were saying is really just understanding that in order for you to be the head of the family, you do have to have a certain level of emotional wellness, right? We don't
Mhm.
shy away from we don't shy away from traditional roles in our tradition, right? We embrace that, but a part of a lot of our unlearning is also unlearning that men are not in touch with their emotions. Like it's not a manly characteristic to be in touch with your emotions, right? I think there has to be a lot of unlearning with that. We're not the same, right? I think someone had mentioned that we're kind of socialized into these roles, but a lot of it is biological, right? And we can't deny those things. Like some of it is biological. Definitely, socialization plays a role, but how it shows up, how we get in touch with our emotions is different for men and women. And but making sure that men, and I definitely want to hear from Brother Musa and Stephanie too, but making sure that men are um, checking in with their emotions, recognizing their triggers, staying curious about who they are, right? Because as we evolve, like what we want, what we need to learn about ourselves changes. Um, so just making sure that those are the things that you're doing. I think that as a community, we have to start creating more spaces for our men to talk in community about their emotions. And it doesn't have to look the same as what women do in community, right?
No.
A replica of that.
We'll
Just
have
make
a blubber
sure,
fest.
right, right. It's not going to be that, right?
No.
They may go play some basketball or shoot the football, whatever the men do, right?
I,
Uh,
because you know what it is, men are, like we said earlier, they're it's not macho, it's not manly if you cry. I mean, look at Brother Musa when he first came on. He's like, I miss, I'm grieving. He expressed about his loss of his mom, and he expressed that most men wouldn't say that they're grieving. So I do appreciate that, Brother Musa, letting us know that, listen, I'm going through some stuff too, because like we said earlier, men.
oh,
Oh no.
Oh, we lost.
Am I? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
There was two things that Brother Rashawn brought up here as the head of the family, helping the family recover for not and not forgetting their own grieving process. One of the things that not only men but most of us don't do, we don't listen. We don't listen to the signs and see the signs where people are grieving, and how do we address that? Addressing what's not being said. Another uh, uh, suggestion is that you men need to find someone that they can talk to. I'm fortunate enough to have three people, uh, um, three men that I do talk with. One is Dr. Muhammad Hatem, one is Dr. Sheikh Bashir, and one is a psychiatrist, Dr. Coker. And we're able to have conversations with each other to help us process some of our losses or some of our challenges, and use the language that is uh, assisting us in getting through the process of whatever it may be. But as the head of a family, you need to learn the tools that you should have to listen, do active listening, hear what your wife or your children are saying or what they're not saying. And with that, I apologize again for being in and out, but I hope I assisted you and
Yes, yes.
Rashawn, and uh, come out to Wagner College next week, and you'll get a whole lot of tools, inshallah. And you too, Steph. Zane.
Love
Okay,
these things.
it says, how do we encourage and support people in our lives to grieve honestly when we see them restricting their grief? It's from Ashanti.
Mhm.
Anyone want to grab that?
I think that one is so complex, but it's so necessary to address. So it's like sometimes we can see someone. Maybe, I think often what makes things less intimidating is to model for someone to demonstrate that it's possible. I feel like and I feel like it applies to everyone, when I'm in a group session, when I do group therapy, when people are silent, sometimes it's just letting the other person know how this is manifesting in you may make them feel secure enough to share what they're feeling. Personally, I have experienced my own set of grief, and when I identify that to my the group members in a grief and loss group, I think it sets in on them that, oh, okay, we all have seats at the table, and we all can somewhat understand and feel less isolated about our grief. So maybe modeling or disclosing something like that to their benefit, maybe show them that there's other options than to keep it to themselves. Like, to just identify, hey, today I feel that it was a little more difficult to get through the day because I feel sad, and I thought about so and such person today. How are you feeling today? Maybe leaving it as an open question. Because often with the yes or no question, someone will lean to yes or no and just leave it at that. So I think that's what I would suggest.
Thank you.
Showing them the way would be helpful.
Definitely. I think that's Sister Zainab had mentioned something like that earlier in the conversation, how she had expressed it to her daughter, how she was feeling.
Mhm.
Wow, this is so awesome, because we're getting, this is an opportunity to get some tools
Yeah,
and how to
even
process things. Go
But
ahead.
even in our work, even as clinicians, I think it's important to appropriate disclosure is
Mhm.
is a 100% appropriate, because oftentimes people don't know. You want to, like Stephanie mentioned, you want to demonstrate. I always say this to kids, right? We want to demonstrate the behavior that we want, right? Same applies in therapy, right? So
Mhm.
if I want you to open up, and I'm asking you to be vulnerable, and you've never witnessed it, you've never done it, I have to be willing to be vulnerable as well. Like I'm asking you to give something that is very difficult for you to do. So I have to be willing and brave enough to be vulnerable with you as well. Appropriate vulnerability, appropriate disclosure, of course, but you want to be able to give them that, because again, everything that we do is teaching. Like we are living demonstrations of what we want to see in the world. I know I sound like a tree hugging hippie, but it's okay. I am that. It's fine. But we really are, right? Like we are a living demonstration of what we want to see in the world. And I know, similar to what Stephanie mentioned, when I facilitate groups, we start with like a wellness assessment, and I complete the wellness assessment as well. And I say,
Mm.
I didn't have a great week I didn't have such a great week, and here's why.
Mhm.
And they are like, oh wow, you didn't have a great week. I didn't have a great week, and they're more willing to
To
have that
share.
conversation and to disclose because I was willing to disclose, right?
Mhm.
So definitely that. Also, just letting people know too, um, that the space is safe for them to disclose,
True.
right? Not constantly saying, if you need me, I'm here. Like if you don't want to do that, but just
Mm.
just checking in occasionally. How are you doing? Are you okay? Can I do something for you? Showing, through actions, right? Maybe dropping off some food. And in our tradition, we know that when someone is grieving the loss of a loved one, a spouse, a husband, a parent, we should be at their service, right? We should be making sure we've kind of gotten away from that as a community, especially as a community of color, and even religiously, we've gotten away from that tradition, but it is a part of our religious tradition.
Mhm.
And it happens to coincide with our cultural tradition. When someone, has passed away, we should really be at their service. What do you need? Like, I have some food here for you. I'm going to drop it off. I'm going to take the kids to school for you so you can sleep a little bit extra. Here, we took up a collection for you so that you can take some extra days off of work. Right? This is what empathy looks like. And when we're curious enough to be a demonstration of that, um, we will see that people are more willing to open up.
Wow.
Yes.
A lot of great information today. I'm
Mhm.
truly okay. There's another question here. What does grief look like for a person who is naturally a giver and someone who is constantly pouring into others as opposed to themselves? Very good question.
Amen.
I'm grieving that thought right now.
Me too. Me too.
Oh boy, who wants to grab that one?
It can look like numbing, right? You continue
Oh,
doing the exact same thing. You don't.
oh, okay.
You continue pouring in, right?
Mhm.
I think that I think when you get into um, any sort of social service, mental health, you do that because you are naturally a giver. You get the knowledge, you go to school, you do all of those things, but you were innately a giver, right? Otherwise, you wouldn't have had that compassion to go into such a field. But I think that what often happens, for those of us who are naturally givers, we don't pause to check in. It took me, like, I lost my mom in April. It took me about a month to close my calendar to clients after she passed. Like, I was literally the day
Mhm.
after her funeral, I continued with my sessions. I did not stop.
Wow.
And it was someone who was very near and dear to me and that knows me and my personality very well. They shared with me, Zainab, you have to stop. You have to hold space for your grief. You're not being fair to yourself.
Mm,
Um, so it can look like business as usual, unfortunately, because that's the nature of a giver. Um, and it can also, just again, this is my experience. I'm not speaking professionally. It can also manifest itself in feeling that you're not being given everything that you give, like that disparity, right? I give
mhm,
so much. No one is here for me when I need it. But what I always say to people that do that is that, are you demonstrating that what you're going through matters enough for you to take the time out for yourself? Right? We teach people
Mhm.
how to treat us. We teach people how to treat us all the time. Like I will intentionally not get back to you for a day because I need time for myself. And I don't apologize for it. I don't make excuses about it. I'm taking time out for me. And it's something you learn. You don't perfect it. I promise you, I don't have this down pat. Like, I'm not speaking like from a place of privilege, but you do have to learn to prioritize your emotions and your well-being. It's a journey. It is. It is.
You
I
know,
resonate with that journey.
Right? Don't you?
when you said the word numbing, I was like, oh no.
Mhm.
I've been told, I was like, I don't feel anything. It's not that I don't feel anything. Sometimes feelings,
See, but
it's painful. It's painful.
Zainab,
Yes.
but I was talking about we all need to have someone that we engage with, and I spoke about the people that I talk to
Yes.
because you said, what does grief look like for a person who is naturally a giver? One doesn't know unless one really knows the.
Right.
Truthfully, yeah.
Yeah.
As he jumps off.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like that felt very much, I resonate with what he said. Like sometimes those givers don't want to be burdensome to other people. They feel most successful or positive and confident when they can give or be helpful. So maybe it is that those people need a little more support. I was just filling in for what you were saying, Dr. Lisa, because I think what you said is so true. Those people need that little extra push to feel comfortable in saying, I'm not okay.
Right.
You got to fill your cup a little bit, pour it in.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with
Brother
what you
Musa, continue.
Man, as I was saying, this grieving is it's becoming quite frustrating for me.
said. Oh.
Yeah.
But Zainab, had a person to recognize who she was because this was someone who was close to her and she knew her. And we all need to have someone like that around us. We all need to have someone that we can confide in. So when they can see that little thing that's off, that they can touch base with us and help us get in touch with our own feelings.
Right.
We as caregivers and others should always do self-reflection at the end of a day or end of a week. I try to do it daily. You see me? What was my day like? How do I feel now?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Busted.
Yeah.
It's funny as he's saying that, right? Because this week I had so much going on with work and other things. And I said to myself, I need to come home and not do work. I need to come home and just throw myself on the couch. And guess what? That's exactly what happened. Right. And I didn't even feel guilty about it after I woke up 3 hours later. But but I did. My body took its rights. It's like, oh, so you don't want to take some time off for me? I got you. And that's what it is. Go ahead, Brother Musa. You're back again.
Am I?
I don't know for how long, but you're
here. Again, all I was saying was that we just need to have people that are close, 1, 2, or 3 people. So when our systems is off, when we're not in touch with our own reality, that they can help us check in. And I spoke about self-reflection. That's a necessity. You need to have a monitor for yourself to see where you are, to know what you need to do. Do you need to reach out to somebody? Do you need to take a step backwards? Zainab said it was a month before her mother died, after her mother died, before someone saw something was off. But she was trying to cope through overworking herself. And we do that, some of us. But again, we have to have people that we trust. We have to establish safe spaces. We need to do workshops, not just talk, where people can come in and feel safe and learn how to develop coping mechanisms for just living.
Yeah.
Definitely. So I don't know if we Naja, do we have any more questions on the panel? Any questions in the chats? what are some tips or coping skills that we can use while grieving? Any tips?
I feel like there's several things that come to mind. I think it's some part of me does like fights against using the buzzword self-care because it's thrown around a lot. But I think it's really first and foremost is the idea of addressing that you do feel off. Checking in with your body to know if you feel comfortable, how you move through your day. I think we were talking about just reflecting and thinking about our triggers because I think that's the first step, knowing when something's wrong. So then we can find the things that we enjoy and make us feel better. But I feel like that's going to look like something different every day. I think in the realm of grief and loss, and personal experience and from what I've witnessed, like day by day, your needs look different, and individually, your feelings are different. But what I found most helpful is like to take those feelings at bite sizes. Don't try if you can, because I don't like to use the word don't because it's so hard to tell someone to do or to not do something. But like to acknowledge that you feel that way, to know that that's real for you, take it in bite sizes, and then look to the things that you enjoy, and also to realize that if those things are different now or they were linked to that person you care about, that's okay. And to notice that what we were saying is to find community. We are social creatures. We need each other. So just know that we're not by ourselves in this, even though we feel like we're going through it by ourselves. I think that's helpful.
Brother Musa, while we have you here, any tips on coping skills that you find helpful?
Well, my coping skills are, again, I'm saying I reach out to individuals and I talk with people. I may go to a show to just relax, a play, a movie, to get away, walk in the park, by the river, by the lake. That helps relieve some of the tension and stress that I may feel. Um, I almost said speaking with my children, but
They might give you extra stress.
then I said, no, you're not being authentic then. Because, again,
I'm sorry. That was that was funny. Oh, what about while we wait for him to buffer back in? What about you, Sister Zainab?
I would say, and I'm gonna take more of a religious approach to coping with this, is getting familiar with, because oftentimes when we lose something, whether it's the loss of a relationship, a family member, a loved one, when we experience loss, our natural first question is why, or why me, right? And initially that question is okay, right? It's not questioning Allah. Allah's not gonna send down his punishment. Like don't make, things so dogmatic in that way. But it's okay to ask that question, why me? But then as people of faith, we have a responsibility to begin to look for that answer, right? Learning who our creator is, learning what he says about himself so that it helps us to gain perspective and why we go through these tests in life, right? Allah tells us in the Quran, in our holy book, that he will test us with some loss of life and some loss of wealth. But give glad tidings to those who are patient throughout all of this. So this is God telling you that you will experience some loss, right? It doesn't take away the pain of it, but it may soften the blow if you understand that this is something that is a natural part of life, right? You're going to lose someone, but then also understanding who our creator is. When he tells us he is Ar-Rahman, he's the most merciful, right? Call out to him. You are the most merciful. You've promised me your mercy. Do not withhold your mercy from me as I go through this loss, right? Leaning into our belief system to manage and to navigate these difficult emotions and these difficult things that we're experiencing in our lives as well, right? I think that's very, very important for us to begin to utilize those tools. Like Allah tells us so much about himself in our holy book in the Quran. He tells us who he is. He tells us about his mercy. He tells us that he is the one who hears us when we cry out to him. And then having that faith that he is there listening to us. And he wants our hearts to be restored and to be healed, and trusting that process, right? That's a spiritual, I guess, tip, right? But again, a more practical tip as well, as Sister Stephanie and Brother Musa mentioned, is do something that you enjoy and recognize that that will change, right? You will pivot between the different things depending on where you are in life and in your grieving process, so to speak. Those things will change in what you enjoy, and that part is okay too. But even if you can't get out, because similar to what Stephanie mentioned, I don't necessarily like the term self-care, because that should be a practice within our lives anyway, right? And it is a hot topic. I'm not talking about going to a spa or getting our nails done. All of those things are important and they're beautiful things. They have their place. But self-care is really kind of being in tune with who you are, right? Like we talked about, recognizing those triggers, being curious enough to kind of answer those questions about why we respond to things the way we respond to things. What is this? What am I feeling and experiencing when something comes up in my life? But going back to the point of me mentioning that, as it relates to taking care of ourselves as a coping mechanism, even if you just have a space in your room where you just kind of sit and you read your favorite book, where you sit and you pray, and you just sit and you reflect on the blessings of your day. There's a term in Arabic, Sophia and Stephanie, called muhasaba, which is self-reflection, self-accountability. Just looking at your day, looking at the good that you've done in your day as a means of coping. Right? I was able to pick up this piece of trash off the street. I said hello to my neighbor and I opened the door for them. Right? Look for things in our lives that will give us a sense of meaning and a sense of joy and a sense of, I am a good person. These things that are happening to me in life are not because I'm bad. Because that, especially as people of faith, that's the first thing we go to. We make God, we make Allah Almighty punitive, right? And we make religion punitive too. Like, this is happening to me because I'm being punished, because I'm not a good person. I'm going through this because of X, Y, and Z. But also getting in the habit of just checking in with ourselves. That can be a way that we cope as well. Forgive me, Sophia. I know we're about to wrap up.
No, it's totally fine, sis. Listen, the conversation is fine, and as long as you guys can be here, it's alhamdulillah. I'm grateful for the input. I'm grateful for the share. And so, if Brother Musa will come back for 2 seconds, because it just reminds me of, remember last year when we had our one of our other programs, and brother Garrett kept popping out.
Yes, Brother Gareth could not stay on.
No,
Internet was not his friend that day.
no. Brother Musa, you have anything to say in regards to, like, what would you tell your chaplains that you work with, or even families that you work with, about how they can cope with loss, and how to help each other, or even just checking in on each other?
Well, when I'm facilitating a group, there is a check-in mechanism that we have at the beginning of each session, and if I have individual supervision, if I see something within someone in a group, we will process that in private, because sometimes people don't want to expose what may be happening with them to a group. But one of the things, and I really forgot to say this in regarding coping for me, and that as a Muslim, I take it to the magic carpet, I call it, and just do some self-reflecting and talking with my Lord. But again, that may not necessarily work for everyone. This is why I'm saying that, we also need to have human contact. And I heard someone say about knowing that themselves. What brings you joy?
Yeah.
Good question. What brings you joy?
Mhm.
I guess with the teenagers, they'll say sleep.
Heard that one a lot, honestly. Yep. I'd say that's true.
That's what I do that all day long. What brings me joy? I'm going to sleep. I'm like, what?
Yes, we have to laugh, right?
That's a good thing too. Bring it. You could definitely get rid of stress through laughter for sure.
Yes,
Yes,
absolutely.
yes.
That was gonna be mine. Like I enjoy laughter is therapy for me.
Me too.
Right? Sometimes a little bit too much.
Mashallah, mashallah. But but as I was saying that with chaplains or trainees, I'll help them process their grief or their coping mechanisms in private. See, because we are all human documents, and we should learn who we are as individuals, because many of us don't know ourselves, and that's what in my teaching I help people to learn who they are.
What happened there?
Oh,
Sounds like a type. Are you typing? I hear typing. Oh, okay. Okay. So we have two more questions after this one in the screen, and then we'll end with the live stream. Okay. You have it, Naja? You want to put it up? Oh, she has it up already. Was that it? Yeah, that was it. All right. So I guess we'll just end because Brother Musa is just not working with the internet today. Oh, here he goes. We're gonna finish up as soon as you're finished, brother.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm not there. Assalamu alaikum. Does anybody hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, no, I just said I'm looking. It said something said that I was backstage and the host would let me in, so I wasn't aware. But again, establishing our relationships with others, being able to talk to people about what's happening, feeling safe, knowing who you are as a person, what as you were talking about triggers, what other points of happiness, what gives you joy. This will assist you in dealing with stress, grief, and all the other social ills that may plague you. And with that, before I cut off again, I'm just going to say assalamu alaikum and greetings to you, Steph.
thank you. Greetings to you too. Thank you for all your words. They were really poignant and really helpful. It's just us. I think you're muted, Safia.
Brother Musa, welcome to our program.
Thank you. Is it just you and I now?
No, by myself, you, and Stephanie.
Okay, Steph. All right,
So
I guess we need to do some processing and debriefing, and I guess not on this venue here, because this is not going to work well. Can we talk this evening?
yes, inshallah.
What's a good time for you?
7. 7 is good.
Okay, inshallah.
All right.
All right.
So anyway, everyone, thank you so much for coming, and
all right, thank you.
Let's have that talk again.
Nice meeting you, Steph.
Nice
I knew
meeting
Sister
you.
Zainab.
And we
So
will actually
inshallah, we'll see each other again soon.
Yes, and we'll be posting some
Assalamu
information from
alaikum.
these organizations that have resources that you guys can and also come out next Saturday, next Sunday actually at Wagner College, and you could check us out on our Facebook page. The location for our indigenous compassionate care and wellness workshop. Take care.
Yeah.
Salam.
Assalamualaikum.